Is it possible to have a fulfilled life without spirituality, since we're talking about living in a world that's mostly young souls than old souls?
Yeah, of course it is. I mean, for most of man's existence, there's been religious beliefs, and religious beliefs are certainly the foundation of a lot of spirituality. It might be a little bit more restrictive because there's a human element to it, but man has existed for many, many years in varying degrees without a deep spiritual belief structure. And some people have lived as atheists and been very fulfilled as atheists or agnostic. Prove it to me and maybe I'll believe it. Right? But when you transcend all of that, we're all on our own path, our own journey, and wherever we happen to fall in that path, that's just fine. So if a young soul is here to get more familiar with the practical realm, and they happen to be born into a nice family, and they happen to get through their academics and get a job in a nice part of the world in a simple town, and they get married and they have children, and those children have children, and they constantly keep in touch with everybody and take on daily responsibilities and feel part of the community and contribute and give however they can, and they go through their whole life and they never once ask, what happens when I die, or where was I before I was born, or is there a greater consciousness that's responsible for this whole existence? If they don't get into those questions, if they never stumble upon these videos or the teachings of the Dalai Lama or Gandhi or Eckhart Tolle, like if that's never part of their realm, can they be happy? Absolutely. And I would say that for every one person that would take an interest in this video, there's 99 people who have zero interest in the discussion whatsoever. And they can still be living very fulfilled lives. If their life gets to be too unbalanced, if the ego ends up running amok, and they end up becoming too focused on this simplistic, materialistic status, they're going to constantly be chasing something, but that may just be part of their journey. And they may get to the end of that journey and then start to ask the deeper questions that may have to wait to the next incarnation to be answered. That's all fine. That's all fine. We think about life as an 80-year undertaking, for some a little bit more or less. But bipedal, hominoid man's been walking the earth for 190,000 years, and the spiritual energy has infused into the human brain for like 50-something thousand years. Man was like sixth in the food chain 55,000 years ago. And then, lo and behold, the spiritual energy showed up, and all of a sudden it shot not just to the top of the food chain, but way out ahead. And for the first time, you start to hear voices. And the first moment of consciousness, which is the recognition that they were separate, right? The recognition that something else was happening came into their mind. But to then elevate that consciousness, which is what you're referring to, and to properly start to question these thoughts and start to recognize where you belong and what your intention is, and then start to ask questions of where your thoughts come from and what truly motivates you.
But right, what makes you transition to that? Like, what makes you start thinking in a different way?
The age of your soul. Like, you can read Michael Newton's books, and he constantly has a past life regression, and the first thing he does is analyze the age of the soul. He gives it there's a color coding in the spirit realm that indicates your maturation.
So there are certain people who will never get to that state.
No, they may. They're just we're talking in thousands and thousands of years of incarnation. It may just take a little bit longer to get there. Right? People are moving at their own pace. Whatever you learn in the physical realm will stay with you for eternity. Right? And the lessons that you learn here are difficult, deep, meaningful lessons. The soul's on this eternal path of evolution. I don't know why one soul is further along than another. I don't know why one's been incarnating for 5,000 or 10,000 years where the other one just showed up last week. I can't give you those explanations. At some point, I'll wind up in the spirit realm and I'll try to communicate back to you. But there's a consciousness at play here that we can't possibly comprehend. There's the astral plane, which is the next closest non-physical plane to the physical realm, is 1,000,000 times the size of the physical realm. And the causal plane is 1,000,000 times the size of the astral plane. And that's, once again, written somewhere in old Indian scripture. Right? We can't possibly comprehend it. Right? The closest metaphor that I use is if you took a golden retriever and you put two bones on the floor and taught them to tap their fist, to tap their paw, they could tap their paw twice. And if you put 3 more in the pile and they looked at it, they may have the sophistication to do basic arithmetic and count the 5 bones and tap their paw 5 times. That would be the same as me trying to explain to you. It would be having that dog then teach calculus would be the same as me trying to explain to you how this whole system works.
Don't you think suffering, though, will lead you into questioning more?
So I think if you're ready for it, so a lot of people, the suffering leads to more suffering, leads to more suffering, and some people will have a grand spiritual awakening, where that suffering gets to the point where it absolutely overwhelms you. If you read like Byron Katie's book, which is Loving What Is, she talks about being overwhelmed by her suffering until she has this wave of awakening, and all of a sudden it becomes so clear to her she's responsible for her own behavior. She becomes responsible for her actions, and the spiritual energy ends up infusing into her consciousness, where all of a sudden she's no longer compelled to blame others for what she's experiencing in life. And in that moment, she takes this huge grand step into a spiritual awakening, a state of consciousness. Eckhart Tolle was depressed and potentially moving to a state of suicide. He was struggling, even though he was living in London, he was a successful academic.
Do you think his depression led him to become the spiritual human being he is?
So this is the tricky part. I think everybody suffers. This is a realm, this is a dense, heavy realm. The physical body suffers, the mental, cognitive, emotional body suffers. We feel incredibly connected to a loved one at one moment and completely riddled with fear as a stranger walks by at the next. The human realm is full of variability and pain. And that is very hard for people that come here. The souls that come here are coming here for deep, deep lessons. And they expect to struggle. I don't know why some of those souls are ready for that spiritual breakthrough where they start to see and they gain perspective on their suffering, and for the first time in their life are able to delineate between their human or ego-based suffering and true consciousness, which is greater intention, which starts to alleviate that suffering. I don't know why some go in that path where others turn to like drugs and alcohol and try to escape it. Or even better, those that early in life turn to drugs and alcohol and then go through this, like Richard Roll, who's this great internet personality who was a hardcore addict, and now he's a very well-known, he has these incredible podcasts with great insight and poise. But he had to go through his period of addiction to then come full circle to recognize his true calling in life and to connect with others who have gone through amazing things. I don't know why the journey is the journey. I can't tell you why some souls get to that period of awakening where others will stay completely unconscious their whole life and suffer right to the very end. I don't have a clear explanation for it other than say that what will be, and wherever you're intended to be, that's what's going to unfold. And if you've gravitated to a video like this, if you're actively seeking it out, it's because there's something calling to you to start to look around.
That's true.
And that's a beautiful thing. But you have to be patient with the people around you that aren't on that same path, because the vast majority of them won't be on that path. And as you get older and you grow more and more patient, you don't want to preach or project upon them what they should be doing. You just want to be patient, recognize that they're all on their own path. You don't necessarily want to be subjected to them. You don't want to be vulnerable to their energy, especially if it's aggressive, right? Especially if it's demeaning. So you may have to figure out a safe support network of other individuals that are on the similar path, right? And I always talk about this in relationships. You want to line up with somebody who's an old soul like you are that will develop similar tendencies in social and other interactions. But at the same time, you want to be really compassionate, because the younger the soul, the more the suffering, and they may not show it. But those egotic, motivated souls that have yet to evolve in the physical realm to a point of true consciousness, they're the ones that suffer the most. Sometimes they suffer in isolation, sometimes they suffer in endless material pursuits, which will never lead to full satisfaction. Sometimes they just suffer with their own mind because they can't turn off their thoughts and they get stuck in their head every day. Right? A spiritual awakening allows you to put perspective, and you'll slip back into these moments, but the spiritual awakening allows you to put perspective around all of that, and you can see the poise and the calm that comes with those that have properly moved to a state of true awakening. You can just sit, you can listen, you can feel it. It's right there.